So we're going to try and satisfy that query. But we'll start today in the Senate, where they're voting on Bill C-51.
Yeah, it's the final vote today, and I think we know how this is going to go. And this legislation has been passed very quickly. The government has made this a priority. They want to get this through, get this done, and they have tried to make a case for these new powers, that there are new threats, new challenges. It's an evolving world. Technology's evolving. We need C-51. Now, when you ask Canadians, I think in general, do you support legislation that allows the RCMP and CSIS to deal with terrorist threats? Most Canadians say, well, yeah, sure, right? We are concerned about terrorism, but at what cost? And the real concern here with C-51 is that it's too intrusive. It waters down too many things. It major privacy implications as a result of this bill. Even the definition of terrorism itself, there's some question whether that's watered down too much. There are a lot of legitimate concerns about C-51, and is this a case of putting too much power in the hands of the state at the cost of eroding our freedoms?
The answer is yes. Did I get it right?
Well, I think you did. I'd see a lot to be worried about here, but I think the question has been in part, well, where not only the libertarians, but small C conservatives who professed a distaste for this kind of excessive government intervention in our lives, the monitoring and the spying and the tracking and all of these kinds of things.
Connie Fournier joins us now, co-founder of Canadian conservative internet forum Free Dominion. Connie, thanks very much for being here today.
Good morning.
Does it surprise you that many Canadians are as willing as they are to allow the passage of Bill C-51, almost supporting it?
It really does surprise me, actually. I think that what we've been finding is that more people who are online and familiar with internet forums and blogs and Twitter and things like that tend to be aware of privacy implications more than just people that you meet on the street. And so I think that's been a real difficulty in trying to get the word out to people who aren't as connected.
It's interesting because this is the same federal government that eliminated the gun registry, rightly so, and I think there were a lot of similar concerns with the gun registry. Even the elimination of the long-form census. The government made the argument that it was too intrusive, that there were privacy concerns with the long-form census, and I think a lot of conservatives said, yeah, we agree. And now so along comes the same government and brings forward C-51 that seems to encompass all that was wrong with these other pieces of legislation. It is out of step with these same kind of principles, isn't it?
Well, that's the point that I've been trying to make for the past few weeks. We've got Prime Minister Harper still going around the country and talking to groups and saying, you better vote for me or the Liberals might come in and bring in a new form of the gun registry. And yet at the very same time, with his other hand, he's bringing in Bill C-51, and we've called it the gun registry on steroids, because it's not just a registry of just gun owners this time. They're talking about amassing just volumes and volumes of information on everybody and sharing it around to like 17 different government departments.
And by what means? I mean, does Bill C-51 give them almost unfettered access to email, phone records, that sort of thing? Well, we know that they've been collecting things like metadata from cell phones and that sort of thing, and they opened up their information collecting mechanisms more legally with Bill C-13, the cyberbully bill, which allowed more government spying, basically. And so we've got that information that they're collecting, as well as just our regular information, like our tax returns, that kind of thing. All of that is right now in different government departments, and Bill C-51 will allow these departments to pretty much share anything they want with each other and with other people. It actually says to any person for any purpose.
Now, what's interesting is that you've made the case, or others have, that this legislation, as flawed as it is, could have been improved, that we could have made an anti-terror law that balanced the need to deal with threats with respect for Canadian freedoms. But we didn't, and the government really didn't seem open to any changes to the bill.
that's what has been really frustrating to me as a conservative. I mean, I even went to the hearings for the committee in the House of Commons as part of a coalition to speak against this. But they were completely closed to any suggestions to improve it at all. And I mean, we've got groups of lawyers and the Canadian Bar Association and legal professors and privacy experts coming out against this thing and saying these are the problems with it. It's really dangerous. And it was like they put their fingers in their ears and went la 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 and didn't listen to anything that anybody had to say. And I don't understand why they took that approach with it when we could have come up with something that might have satisfied the security concerns and also satisfied the privacy concerns of the citizens.
It seems to me that this legislation is being planned. I mean, how do I put this? Laws have to survive a long time, right? We're going to have laws with a shelf life, and that's why, we get everything from ineffective laws that just don't have any place in our society anymore to those really silly laws like there's whaling is illegal in Nebraska. But it seems to me like this is a hastily prepared bill that is supposed to deal with the events of October 2014 and doesn't have much regard for the lives of Canadians in, say, the year 2025.
Well, there's a saying that hard cases make bad law, and I think this is one of those cases. You know, we had that incident on Parliament Hill, and it was a terrible thing, and everybody wanted to do something about it. But when you're making a law that we all have to live with, you really have to put a lot more effort into looking at what the long-term consequences might be. And I've always said you have to look at the worst possible way that law could be used and assume that that's what's going to happen and close those loopholes before you pass it. And that certainly isn't what was done in this case.
Yeah, it's weird because right now, the concern is coming from a lot of left-wing groups and environmental groups that maybe this legislation will be used to target us. But it's easy to imagine. I mean, if the Liberals come into power and this law is maintained, which it sounds like for all intents and purposes it would be, I think the shoe would be on the other foot, that a lot of conservative groups who are silent right now might say, well, geez, hang on a second here. This government might now use this law against us instead.
Well, that's been another source of my frustration because it seems that a lot of conservatives are just willing to say, well, I trust Stephen Harper and the conservative government, and they're not going to abuse this law and do anything to me, so I'll support them on this. And they totally are ignoring the fact that eventually we're going to have another government. We're not going to have a conservative government in power forever. So even if you trust them implicitly, you have to look at what might happen if somebody you don't trust has this kind of power. And I don't think a lot of conservatives are doing that.
I think it's interesting, too. I mean, you wonder why a lot of the media, a lot of journalists are outspoken against this and opposed to it. It's because we report on government. It's not up to us. Like there's this mindset, right? It's a very obvious cliched mindset that if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. But people don't seem to realize that it's not up to you to define whether or not you're doing anything wrong. It's up to the government of the day. So you might be in step with today's government, but next year's government, 10 years down the road, they might determine that you're doing something wrong, and you don't want them to have these powers when that day comes.
Exactly. And we dealt with that when we were fighting Section 13 as well. We fought that because we said, well, this is being abused, and even if it's people we don't agree with, it could be used against us at some point, and we stood on principle and we fought that. But a lot of the same people that were so outspoken in fighting Section 13 are completely silent on this, and I don't understand it, because I think in a few years they might be saying, oh no, look what's happening to us now, and we have to fight this, and by then it'll be too late.
All right, well, Connie, stand by if you can, please, because we just want to take a commercial break. We'll continue this conversation after that.
Okay, sure.
This is Kingkade and Breakenridge on News Talk 770.
The conservative case against C51. Connie Fournier is a co-founder of the conservative internet forum Free Dominion, freedominion.ca. We tweeted a link out to this letter as well, stopc51.ca/conservative, where this conservative case is laid out. These arguments are laid out in this letter. People can read it for themselves. Connie, what kind of a response have you been getting to this? I mean, are conservatives more inclined to want to dig in their heels and say, look, we support Harper, therefore we're going to support this legislation? Or a lot of the conservatives you talk to, are they open to hearing these arguments?
We've found that a lot of people really want to support Stephen Harper, and I've made the point that if this legislation had been brought forward by a Liberal government or a Liberal NDP coalition or something like that, a lot of people that I know would have been really fighting hard against it. I mean, we'd have had rallies on Parliament Hill and everything, just based on past history. But I do think that a lot of people just worked really hard to get the Conservatives in power, and they finally have a majority government, and they don't want to rock the boat. And I think that's a really big mistake, because I think that as the Conservative base, it's our responsibility to make sure that the government that we put in power is accountable and that they're not doing things that violate our conservative principles or our freedom, especially.
Is that widely enough understood, though, like what exactly those freedoms are that are being violated? I understand that in forums like Free Dominion, you'll have people who are far more engaged in the political process, but this just seems like a government taking advantage of not just an apathetic electorate, but maybe an unsophisticated one.
I totally agree with that. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that have been speaking out against it are people who are on the left. And so it's been very easy for this government to say, well, of course they don't support it. They're leftists and we're conservatives, and they wouldn't support anything we do. And so it has been a real uphill battle. And I mean, the internet helps. We can talk to each other in forums and blogs and Twitter and Facebook and educate people that way. But there are so many Canadian citizens that are not plugged in to the internet, and to reach them is so difficult. And when they pushed this bill through so quickly, it just made it almost impossible to get the word out to everybody. Although the polls did show that as time went on, less and less people supported it. So I think if we'd had more time, it might have helped.
It would. And it's interesting because, I mean, the government's tried, I think, to oversimplify this debate. So, I mean, either you're opposed to terrorism and you want to do something about terrorism, or you're not. So I think to a lot of conservatives that, I don't know if it poses a dilemma of sorts, but they're torn, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
we're the ones who get the threat.
With lawful access.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody remembers Vic Taves saying, well, you either support us or you support the child pornographers. And, when they do it like that, it makes it very difficult to have a rational argument. I don't think anybody's saying there isn't a potential problem with terrorism in this country, or that we shouldn't do anything. But I think that there has to be some middle ground where we're saying, okay, we're going to make this law to try to protect ourselves, but we're not going to sacrifice our freedom for it.
It does. I remember that Vic Taves line as well, and it just stuns me that passes as political discourse in a country where the joke is my two favorite hockey teams are the Calgary Flames and whoever's playing the Edmonton Oilers. like that's the comedic form of the debate that Vic Taves put forth.
Yeah, and it makes it really difficult to have a political debate that way. And they did wind up pushing through lawful access, even though the Supreme Court had said that some of the provisions were unconstitutional already. Mm-hmm. So that law is going to fail a constitutional challenge, and very likely C51 will fail a constitutional challenge. There's already one being planned. So, but it seems like they're willing to push it through and just use it for as long as they can until it, for however many years it takes to get to the Supreme Court and gets crushed.
Right, and by that point, the damage will be done. I mean, as long as they are able to use the bill, then they will be damaging people constitutionally in so doing. But is this a bill you feel that the Harper government could sort of fall on their sword on then?
I think that there's a real danger of that for them, because we have a few months now until the election, and I know that there's no way I could vote in good conscience for a party that proposed this bill. So I can't vote for the Conservatives, and I can't vote for the Liberals, because they basically formed a little coalition to get this thing through with them. So, what are people like me left to do at that point? We find independent candidates, or do we go for the NDP, who's promised to repeal this thing? I find it really hard to imagine marking my X for the NDP, but what do you do? I mean, we have to protect our freedom first.
Well, I think a lot of Republicans ran into this problem when, they had one position on the NSA and surveillance when Bush was in power, and then once Obama was in power, their views shifted, but it made them look hypocritical. I wonder if conservatives are backing themselves into the same trap, that if Justin Trudeau or Tom Mulcair, or some combination of the two, wins the next election, the conservatives are going to come out hard against a lot of this stuff, and the arguments are going to seem weak, because it'll be easy to turn around and say, hey, well, you guys were all for it when Harper was in power.
Yeah, and it's a really ironic thing that we fought so hard to get the Conservative government into a position of power, and I really think that it has weakened the Conservative movement, having the Conservatives with the majority government, because the Conservative grassroots won't do anything when something like this comes up. And yet, if it was a different party that was doing it, then they would. And like you said, if the government changes and this thing's still in effect, then I can see all of these people who've been sitting here all this time, at that point, standing up and fighting against it. And I think that's a real problem. I don't know how we tackle that, but we somehow have to keep the Conservative base motivated to push for our principles when our own government's in power.
Connie, it's a great point to end on, and thanks for this conversation. We'd love to talk to you about it all day long. We can't do that because of time, but instead what we'll do, we'll just tap your phone and post your conversations on the internet.
Might as well, everybody else is.
All right, freedominion.ca, people can join in the conversation there too. Connie, thanks for joining us here this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, Connie Fournier, co-founder of freedominion.ca, also stop51.ca/conservative. These points are all laid out in this open letter. We're going to talk new math after the 9:30 news. It's Kingkade and Breakenridge on News Talk 770.